Thank you very much, Emma. Yes, it's really good to be with everyone here and talking about a subject that I enjoy talking about too. So I'll just introduce myself very briefly. My name's Jon Lewis. I've got this title here, Corporate Evolutionist. Basically, I like to evolve the way work happens, both from a human level and also a systems and governance perspective as well. I'm an alumnus or alumni of Zengenti. I know some of you, many of you actually, it's good to see your names and faces again. And I'm really pleased to be invited back to do this. Drew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Happy to, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Drew Deneen. I'm the head of professional services at Zengenti. Again, some of you may know me. If you don't, I lead a team of designers, developers, scrum masters, who have the good pleasure of working with many of you to deliver projects with Contensis. So using our experience and understanding your needs to get the best out of your use of Contensis, I suppose. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And Rob.
Hi, hello everyone. My name's Rob Turner. I'm a Scrum Master here at Zengenti, and I work in professional services with Drew. Prior to this, I've worked in lots of different web roles in higher education for over 15 years. I was thinking about it, it might actually be 20 years. A long time anyway. So, hi.
Thank you. And yeah, please, Drew and Rob, just jump in at any point during this. If you do it too much later, don't worry, no, that's fine. So, overview of what we're going to be talking about. Okay, obviously the subject is your project too big for agile, and that's really a way of us approaching this topic, because that's a common objection or an instinctive thought that big projects need big plans and big documents and equally large sort of processes and complexity around them. And so we're just tackling that head on really with these topics. So we're going to look at how to take a typical project and deliver it in iterations, the nature of risk in traditional projects and agile. So this is one for all of you qualified Prince 2 folk out there. And briefly looking at how we can learn from each iteration and how that adds into the final product. So delivering an iteration is not a big bang. Most of the time, I think when people think of iterations, they might instinctively assume we're just taking a normal project and delivering it in sections, which is how any project is delivered really in traditional waterfall project. I'm saying waterfall, I mean that traditional project management for. And so here's an example of what iterations aren't. So this is an example of building an articulated lorry and taking it to market. So the first bit is a wheel, and then lots of wheels, and then the body on the back, and then the actual cabin and engine, and then putting it all together. That's what we're talking about. Instead, we're talking about just the concept of moving something, starting off with a wheelbarrow, then a flatbed truck, and then a minivan, lorry, articulated lorry. So at each iteration, which is each of these blobs, we are delivering value. There is something that is usable to somebody, and we're learning each time as we go. So that's what we mean by an iteration. So I'm going to give an example briefly of a real world requirement that somebody put out to the marketplace that we looked through and spoke to them about. And the goal was to create a space for internal collaboration across a very large organization. And they'd gone through the process of gathering the requirements. So they came up with the idea of a marketplace of collaboration projects with owners and keywords that allows you to filter through them. It's obviously a sophisticated search that would go with that. And then a directly linked in of individuals setting out their interests and projects that they're personally connected with. And this makes sense if you want to foster internal collaboration. Having a platform for people to do that, like that intrinsically makes sense to people. Oh yes, and obviously each project is on a microsite, so that you can promote what you're doing internally to everybody else and get buy-in and so on. So the process that they've gone through, they were engaging vendors to pitch their out-of-the-box product to compare with a bespoke build. This is where I'm now sort of painting my own picture here a little bit, but let's say it's reasonable to think it would take 18 months from market engagement launch, and then you would need a multi-channel communications campaign just to roll out the thing and actually make sure it works so that people actually use this collaboration platform. I say I'm being a bit fictional there is because I don't actually think the project went ahead. And when when I spoke to them, I actually said you could simply just launch a WordPress blog internally, find people who are already collaborating on internal projects, so the people who are already doing the innovative work, and then put a WordPress blog together very briefly, and then turn the comments on so people can say, yes, I'm interested in this. And this is a very cheap and quick way to find out if there is genuine interest in the appetite for that in the organization. And that would have taken a couple of days to set up the blog post. And then, yes, iterations based on need of what people are actually asking for. So do they need a whole LinkedIn replica, or is it actually a much more simple list of names and interests? And then as the WordPress platform it struggles to handle the features, then evolve that and build on it, and or switch to something that scales better. But all the way along that process, you would have actually proven what you need. So I've had a go at putting together the sort of a little comparison here. So with a traditional project, and that's genuinely the rough budget they were looking at for this, it has to work after you've spent that long and that much money. You really have to make it work. So it's career driven. So whether it works or not, whoever's involved in that, certainly in the leadership roles, it has to work. There's a lot of skin in the game. And with Agile project, it would have been pretty cheap on the grand scheme of things. It would be okay to fail. And it's career defining if it grows and takes off and works. But if it doesn't work, it'll be forgettable. And so everyone can just move on. So there's a lot less a career risk, should we say, with the more agile approach. So that's an example on that we chose not to get involved with at the time, because we found that the way the whole project was being set up was incredibly wasteful, to put it plainly, and it was also very hard to make sure that we could deliver and actually make the thing work, because there wasn't really the established need that we done very quickly with something smaller. So we're going to use a case study now of Actig. I'm going to hand over to Drew just to introduce this.
Thanks. So yeah, Actig are an organization who primarily sell a product called Revitive. They are in the kind of medical and healthcare space, I suppose. Revitive is a product that effectively you pop your feet on and it sends good vibrations up through your body and makes you feel great. And yeah, they effectively came to us, I think, in kind of the summer of the first lockdown, with a bit of a different proposition for us, I suppose. They are, as you can guess, a straight up e-commerce brand. They sell products online, which isn't ordinarily our kind of MO, I suppose. So what they were looking for and why they engaged with us, I suppose, is that they were coming from a place where they'd position themselves onto a CMS platform called Magento, which is a very kind of enterprise level, if you're an e-commerce business, you need us type of proposition as a CMS, I suppose. But where they were finding difficulty is that their product range is fairly kind of limited. They've got, I think, a core range of 4 or 5 different variants of Revitive, plus maybe 20 kind of accessories that go with it. Now, Magento is built and purpose-built for large-scale enterprises. I'm talking 20,000 product catalogs, tons of kind of features on top of that. And I suppose what they were struggling with was the over-engineered architecture that they were within, where if they wanted to make quick, meaningful change, they felt like they were handcuffed by all the scaffolding that was surrounding them. So they came to us with this kind of proposition of wanting to use Contensis as, I suppose, technical middleware for other platforms that they were using that are kind of best in breed for what they wanted to do. So they were well kind of embedded with Oracle NetSuite for all of their order management, customer management, product management. And they wanted something to act as a kind of go-between for the front end of their store and where they ultimately wanted to push and pull all their data from. So they came to us with the proposition of delivering 12 different territory websites. So they operate in the UK, the US, Canada, Italy, France, many other places, all with their own little fun quirks and differences. So I guess, John, that is where our story begins.
Thank you. And so we've created a little fiction here of what the project would have looked like had we done a waterfall approach to this. I say we, I don't work for Zengenti anymore. I'm just stuck saying we are institutionalized. You guys did, okay. And so here's a information of the stages. So gathering requirements, developing the spec doc and all the revisions around that, design revisions, build the templates, and do all of the multiple integrations that Drew alluded to, testing and hardening for every single region, and then go live for all regions. So Rob, how would you feel about that sort of project?
Scared. It's pretty scary to imagine following waterfall for this project. There's just so many moving parts involved, and leaving it to what's effectively going to be a big bang release for so many territories, as Drew mentioned, 12 of them, and each with their own peculiarities. It just seems so hugely risky. There's the danger with waterfall that you can build up so much technical debt from anything being missed in any of those processes, or even simply misunderstood. You know, the known unknowns, the unknown unknowns, all those sorts of things. And in that huge time scale, it would be huge. So then having to go back and unpick all of that debt at the end would be extremely painful. So you're instantly in the territory of probably adding more time to the project just to go back and fix anything you may have missed, and that's going to also add to the costs, not to mention the release dates. I'm aware that I think Actigy had to sort of be off their systems by a certain amount of time, so you're putting all this sort of stuff in jeopardy. So yeah, scary.
Thank you for giving us that emotional reaction. That's really helpful, because I think that's the reality, isn't it? Like, you just look at that, everyone's intimidated from all sides. So let's look at the reality. Here's a very happy individual, just to illustrate how it actually went. And so, Drew, do you want to tell us what about this one?
Yeah, so as we said, we knew what the full list of requirements and what we needed to achieve was from the outset. We agreed that up front. We committed to it, Actigy committed to it. But as Rob said, to go into that in a way that we were making assumptions and educated guesses and unvalidated theories for that length of time, for that amount of functionality, for that amount of sheer work, as Rob said, scared the life out of us. So in conjunction with Actigy, and I suppose this is maybe the biggest compliment I could pay them for a company who aim a product at 60 plus, is they're very forward thinking and very kind of modern inclined in terms of technology and approaches. They were fully behind kind of putting up a weather balloon, if you like, as let's release one territory within the first 4 months. So we were looking at a kind of 12-month timescale there before you could say that that's kind of to get your full end-to-end, all the bells and whistles done. We compressed that down and just said, look, Canada's our weather balloon. What do we need to get? Effectively, customers in Canada picking the product they want, adding it to their basket, being able to check out and supply all of the information that we need, and for us to tie all that in with the order processes that we have to fulfill that order. So what that meant is that we could just get down to we could narrow our scope, narrow our focus to say, for this first 4 months, for this first release, we don't care about the fact that in the US you can get a discount if you've got a certain type of health insurance, and in France you could pick up your order from a weird post office down the road, and in Germany you can ask to be invoiced in a very particular way. All we care about is Canada. And kind of between us, we picked a territory that didn't kind of pose those particular challenges, was fairly straightforward. It did have some integrations in there that would have massive reuse value, such as kind of integrating with a very common payment gateway like Stripe that was going to get used by everything. So we could tackle some of those challenges early, but most importantly, we could validate them quickly to find out if our approaches are right or wrong or have flaws. But if they do have flaws, we could find out about them very, very quickly.
I think you summarised the national identity of many countries there very well based on technical requirements. Fantastic, thank you. So reintroducing some traditional project management terminology here then. The critical path, for anyone who's not familiar with the idea of a critical path, it's anything in the project that has to be there for the thing to launch. And if any delay on that particular item, then the whole thing's delayed. So an example would be, say, hosting needs to be in place, because if it's not in place, you can't go live. So that's on the critical path. So I've highlighted a couple of things here, but Rob, could you speak a little bit about how it would have been to tackle the template and build all those 10 or more integrations if all of those have been on the critical path and getting that done?
Yeah, that would have been very difficult because it should all be about iteration and knowing that we've got, say, the MVP that we've created, not only works, but has been used in the real world by real customers is critical. I think doing everything as sort of one stage in a long planned out waterfall strategy, working on those different territories. There's again so many things in play just for those templates, as we're calling them. We're on sort of content types now, but those content types, the components, all the back-end processes, and also as far as we've got language variations amongst those different territories. Canada is French Canadian as well as English. We've got sort of Germany and Dutch and things like that, all these different variations to try and get right in that one sort of block within this whole timeline. It's a perfect breeding ground for technical debt and accruing it. So yeah, I'd be incredibly against that.
Thank you. And I don't know if you want to speak a little bit, Drew, about what requirements gathering would have been like for all of the regions.
Fun, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, figuring it all out for Canada alone was an undertaking, just to kind of get under the skin of obviously all the documentation that goes along with Oracle NetSuite, Stripe, every kind of single process that they wanted to integrate with. So as I said before, they really wanted to kind of have this lean stack, this lean technical architecture where we were calling on different platforms to do the thing that they're good at, I suppose, and not kind of saying, oh, we'll just stick it all under Magento and use the bits that are necessary and live with all the downsides of it, I suppose. So yeah, there was a lot of work involved just for Canada. So imagining doing it for 12 territories, which, as I say, they've all got their fun quirks, and certain payment gateways are only allowed in certain territories, and tax is different in every territory, and discounts are treated differently in every territory. So doing that would be crazy. I think the other thing that this really illustrated, and it's, I suppose, the easiest comparison to make with an e-commerce brand, is that in this way, they get no value back until a year in. Nothing. They haven't taken any orders in the thing that they're invested into. So the fact that we could make this release after 4 months and not only say we've provided something of value because it kind of feels like it, but say you're now taking money through something that we've delivered, you're getting, I was going to say pounds, but in that sense, Canadian dollars, back within 4 months, showed that not only did they kind of have confidence that it was right, but I suppose as a business case, everyone's got someone to answer to. They could make that case and say, we've proven that fundamentally it works after 4 months, and the bank account shows that as well, because the orders are coming in. The good people of Canada can order their products.
So yes, after the launch, the client could relax. Did you observe that yourself, Rob, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. Launching that first site, seeing it all working, and as Drew said, most importantly, getting those first real orders through from real customers who are going to go and use the product was great. It meant that to a large degree, there's much more work to be done for these other territories, that we got it right, and seeing that gave us and the client great confidence that the next launches should be fine too. All the key parts doing what they're supposed to gives you a really solid bedrock to move on from and iterate. It's worth mentioning as well, something we spoke about earlier, was that after a while the clients were so comfortable with the whole process, when we were in a really good place, they're actually making their own site releases, so they were able to launch the new territories themselves. So we got to the point where releasing just became kind of another iteration within the project itself, because we knew it would all work. So yeah, it was just great to see so much confidence moving on from something like that.
Cool. And in just a moment, I think we'll show how they do that release themselves. And so I think you already mentioned that, yeah, things like health insurance for the US or payment gateways for Germany weren't even thought about or considered until it was necessary to. And so, yes, do you want to show us through the how this how people can both preview things before it goes live, but also then the actual process of making things live? I'll stop sharing at my end, so then I shouldn't think you can.
Is that okay for everyone?
Yours. Got it. Yeah.
Nodding heads.
Sure.
Cool. So yeah, we as we said before, we knew from the outset we had all these territories, so that, I suppose, gave us the ability to make sensible decisions that wouldn't bite us in the bum later on, I guess. So early on, a real kind of statement of intent, I suppose, for Actigy was that in having the setup that they had in terms of Magento, it was all very disparate. Each territory had its own site, its own code repo. They were rebranded at different times. If I'm kind of Joe Public looking up Revitive and I maybe get lost into the wrong territory, I might think they're two different companies. So they knew that they wanted uniformity in place from day one. That to us said a design system that kind of caters for all with some variance, and also a code repository that means they get shared benefit when we put enhancements into the code, so that a search update to the US finds its way to Germany as well. Now, doing that technologically sounds quite challenging, but again, we just kind of went with the first release, knowing what we wanted to do later, and then test a theory, validate it, see if it works, happy days. So you can see here, this is actually the release tags for the Actigy repository. And you'll see at the end of each one, they're just appended with a territory code. So you'll see the latest ones that went out just yesterday was for the UK, also went out for the US, and then kind of lots of attention on the UK and US lately. But previous to that, we'd done a kind of significant update to version 1.7.3, and that went out to France, Australia, the US, the UK, the Netherlands, etc. So we could get quite selective with when we actually released code to certain territories. And I suppose that put us and the client in a place where they never felt fearful of, oh, well, if we do this big release, again, falling into that big bang methodology, I suppose, what will it mean? What will it do to everything? So we could allay some of those fears and some of those trepidations by saying, we're only going to push it out to the UK. Worst thing that would happen is we spot something, we roll it back. It's not gone everywhere. And doing these kind of releases with all these territories subsequently, again, that kind of let us have total control over when that happened, to the extent that the client was doing it themselves, which was really cool. We'd find out on a Monday morning that a site was live and we had nothing to do with it, which was a nice place to be in. So to kind of get them to that point, And anyone who's worked with our kind of Docker containerization and stuff will hopefully find this stuff familiar. But when we're kind of running the app in the browser, me as a non-developer who's not running VS Code locally and stuff, I can kind of check in for different permutations of different types of content, different territories, different types of code, depending on where it is through the pipeline. So if you kind of have a quick look up in my URL bar up here, I'm currently looking at the develop branch of the latest unpublished version of the content in the Revitive UK site. But I think if I switch over here, then suddenly I'm being served the USA content in the same kind of configuration, develop branch code and preview data. And then again, if I wanted to change that, so I'm going to revert back to the UK, I can see that actually this kind of campaign about this coupon code is pre-release. It's not been published yet. So if I actually jump to a version of what is, I suppose, a duplicate of the live site, what I'd see on revitive.com, I see kind of what it looks like now. So I can easily just jump between these things. The client equally as non-developers, they could do this stuff as I could. And that kind of breaks down the barrier with our development teams to then understand exactly where things are, understand where it is in the progression of being released, and then have that kind of safety net to say, that's great, let's push it out to France, and so on.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, risk management. I've been there where project managers have said, okay, let's deliver the big project first in the proper way, and we'll do the risky stuff later, and referring to agile as inherently risky. Now, I'm not here to say that agile has no risk involved in it, but I would hopefully prove a point that it is a more manageable risk and lower risk than using traditional project management. So why do we plan? I'm not here to say that planning is always bad. I think there are some bad reasons for doing it though. So some good reasons that we plan to spot things before they become a problem, so we can reduce and mitigate risks ahead of time. And the reason I'm talking about planning is because I think my belief is where a lot of the problems creep in with traditional projects. Everything's locked in very early, and the ability to change is a significant process, and often a political process as well. And so looking at planning, because this seems to be where things start, it allows us to plan resources ahead of time, so who and what we need before we need it. Allows us to get buy-in internally to communicate value that will be created, a bit of internal positive politics there. And if something goes wrong, we can point to the start. Look, I did do the planning. Look, here's all of the documentation, the PID and everything. And look, and at the end, you can do a post-mortem to review how the planning was flawed. This time we can improve the planning so that nothing will go wrong again, or reduce it. So following that, I'm going to say my most cynical take of why people plan or use planning so fervently is that it allows us to push our own agenda without being open to feedback from others, including customers. So if I set in stone my requirements and say, this is what we need to do, and this is where we need to go, I'm being a heroicler, and I don't need to listen to reality or what people need along the process because it's in the plan. Is it in the plan? No. Okay, I don't need to listen to it. Now that's a pretty extreme view. I'm just using it to illustrate one reason why it feels safe to do this, to plan so heavily and to lock everything down, because it can be challenging to one's ego to hear that our plans weren't correct and our brilliant thoughts weren't the best at the beginning. So planning does feel safe, and it gives us the illusion of controlling the future and making it more predictable. And if I have this Gantt chart, it's more likely that reality will conform to my ideas. I would say I've been guilty of that in the past. So I'm not saying like all planning is a bad idea. And clearly, in the example that Drew and Rob were talking to, there was planning, but there's also huge amounts of room to change things as new wisdom emerges during the project. So my stab at defining a philosophical difference between traditional and agile project delivery. So traditional, we know what is needed. If we control enough people, things, systems, etc., then we can make it happen as we expect, and it will create value. And the agile equivalent would be, we have ideas about what's needed, but we need to test them. There are simply too many unknowns to control for. Let's try something and discover what is genuinely needed. That way we really do understand what's valuable. So that's the idea of iterating and testing and observing. So that's where it's a more empirical method is the idea. So again, another way of thinking about this is the risk of physical movement, physical activity. So if we compare staying in bed, where it reduces apparent risk, you're not going outside where sharp things and weather and all that sort of stuff. But over the long term, staying in bed, if we only stayed in bed, it's incredibly reckless for our bodies to be just lying in bed all of the time. If we're able to get up, but we choose to stay in because we think it's safer, it actually isn't. But it's not obvious in the moment because it feels safe. It feels safe lying in bed and not doing anything. So exercising feels in the moment. It feels less certain. We don't know that we're not going to twist an ankle or get caught in a snowstorm or something or whatever. But the risk is there, but it's lower. It's lower, but it just doesn't feel that way. And long term, it reduces risk. So it's just an interesting little illustration. And while I'm talking fitness, the word agile is seemingly altered to mean unstable or changeable in some people's minds. The idea that we just constantly change our minds with no consequence, and it's kind of wobbly. But actually, agile, I think of it how it was, the word was used before it became a software development fad. Think of it like an athlete having agility, so the capacity, the ability to move in different directions and apply oneself to different activities at different times quickly without needing to stop and reset and think and so on, and or without risk of injury as well. So what's interesting was Drew was talking earlier around how you have to wait for the value to be created or delivered with waterfall right to the end. And this slide talks about that here, because when you look at agile, you're getting value earlier and at more regular intervals. And also risk is treated in a similar way. So risk here is building over time waterfall, so that when it goes live, everyone is nervous and having sleepless nights and working long hours and so on, just to make sure that they think they've caught everything and it's just right. But with agile, the risk is only one release long. And so, yes, there is still risk, but it doesn't ever build quite as much or anything like as much as it would with waterfall. So I will just click through some of these, and maybe Drew and Rob, perhaps do you want to just tell us a little bit about client experience and how you think they found it with Actog?
Yeah, I think as you said before, agile is really being, nimble, and as Drew said as well, that they were very forward thinking in their approach to both technology and doing the project in this way. So it's again about doing iterations of the work. The client gets to see that stuff as we go along. So yes, after 4 months we actually had a site going. So I think again it was just reassuring. I think someone just put a question in the chat about sort of working with people that don't really have that agile thing. So it wasn't the case in this project, but I've certainly experienced that before, particularly in higher education. But from Actog's point of view, again, once we got the first site done, it was really a case of just iterating, not only in terms of just let's get the next site out, but it was also adding the bells and whistles and things like that. So they get to see all this stuff bolted onto a really rock steady framework. And I think, yeah, it worked well both sides.
I think that point of that Erica asked a question about actually where can you operate in an agile way if your stakeholders don't operate in an agile way. I mean, we worked with a product owner called James, who's the head of marketing, I think.
Yeah.
He's got a marketing director to answer to. He's got a line to the founders of the company who he needs to answer to. And I think the long and the short of it was they didn't really care what approach he took, but who's going to complain with Canada's moved after 4 months and it's taking orders. The next one's a month away and it'll be taking orders. Where's the big objection to it, right? So I think that's the most important thing. Are these stakeholders going to be so bogged down in it has to follow this process in order to get to the end result? I mean, both approaches want to get to the end result, all of the sites out there with all of the features delivered. We just want to do it in a different way. That means we've got less chance of making a massive mistake along the way, I suppose. Or if we do, we're going to figure it out a lot earlier than a year down the line when 12 sites go live and everyone has a heart attack because some fundamental part of it doesn't work. So yeah, I'd like to think it's possible. I'm slightly biased in that I've probably not had to deal with a lot of it myself. And I'm a bit pig-headed and I just think, do you really care if I do it this way? If I get to the same end result, as I said. So I suppose it's how involved they are and how much they're looking over your shoulder and how comfortable they are in the way of working. But yeah, as I said, some of the reasons and values that we've said for doing things, learn earlier, release earlier, get value earlier, less risk. Again, who can argue with those points, I suppose. So yeah, that would be my take on kind of coaching a stakeholder into a different way of working, I guess.
So I think just so we're coming to the end of the risk discussion, there is the risk of with waterfall of building something that isn't needed, and particularly if it's features or something like that. There is the habit of trying to handle the future by making technology endlessly scalable because we don't know. And so when you're adding, with the Active example, so many different regions, there's lots of unknowns. So you'd want to make everything that's scalable perhaps, but actually if you just think about one at a time, you only build what you need or closer to what you need rather than something that could handle more than you need. I've got Bronto Joe here. So one of you guys could tell us a little bit more about that.
Say that one if you want, Rob. So yeah,
sure.
As part of the project, as I said before, James was our primary point of contact, but as with any process, and again, it actually followed Scrum pretty traditionally in that James was there every single day making decisions, but when he needed to, he'd defer to kind of specialists in his team to do certain things. One of those happened to be a guy called Joe that worked with a system called Bronto, hence quickly got named Bronto Joe. And Bronto was a product offered by Oracle that kind of managed customer management and email marketing primarily. You bought a product and you're happy for us to send you updates about X, Y, and Z type stuff. So yeah, I think Canada integrated with Bronto. And yeah, if we had have kind of taken that waterfall approach, then we would have done every single territory and integrated it with Bronto. The fun thing we found out after, I think, the French launch was that Bronto was abruptly coming to end of life. They were discontinuing the product. So thankfully at that point, we'd integrated it with, I think, 2 territories, maybe starting to think about the third one. And remarkably, to continue the nickname, they chose a platform called Klaviyo. So Klaviyo Joe was born. And Klaviyo Joe had his new requirements about his new system called Klaviyo. So yeah, a quick kind of rework. I think it was like a day or 2 maybe to go and take the Bronto integration, flip it on its head and turn it into a Klaviyo integration, set it up in a way where we were thinking ahead a little bit so that we could rinse and repeat for all the other territories within reason. But again, kind of getting that information, which no one could have anticipated at the start of the project, after we'd only implemented it twice, if you like, meant that we had to unpick 2 things rather than unpick 12 things, if you want to think of it like that.
Cool. So I want to make sure we get time for some of these questions coming through. So just the last couple of slides here, just talking about feedback and learning through iterations. So I've come up with this fictional idea of, let's say I'm the genius behind this product development, and I've got a mate who drives a lorry, and I know he's massively into rave music, and so I think, yeah, cool, we need every lorry to have a huge sound system on the outside of it and lights and everything, so that when these guys park up at night, they can have discos in their car parks, because that's probably a really cool selling feature. But in reality, that's probably true. It's just my mate that would like that. So with an iterative agile approach, you would have the equivalent of whatever a wheelbarrow is. You can probably, if you look closely, there are some disco lights around the rim of that wheelbarrow. We did put this together with a radio on it. And after that first iteration, we find out actually, okay, people who move stuff like the sounds, they like music, but they don't really care that much about disco lights. It's not that pop. So then from then on, it just becomes a radio in future iterations. So that's a slightly silly example, but well, maybe if you don't think it's silly, do launch products like this. That's fine. I won't hold you to any IP. But the equivalent does happen. Yeah, I'm sure all of you have found people's brainchild followed through and delivered, and then no one uses it, and everyone kind of just ignores that. Whereas if we have the courage to test the thing and check our thinking, and have the humility to learn and go, okay, that wasn't right, cool, we need to change it, then you end up with something much better fit for the marketplace people actually need. Rob, could you just tell us a little bit about how you guys tweaked something when you, was it the French one, something to do with tax calculation, and how that then informed future releases?
It's yeah, a little bit similar to the Clavio Joe thing, but after we released Canada and France, we obviously started taking real orders in them. We noticed that the way we were handling tax needed refactoring. So rather than, again, if we were doing this in a kind of waterfall approach, this would have been too late, but we needed to update this for future releases where that same approach for those 2 territories wouldn't have worked as intended. So this was mostly around standardizing the way that tax was calculated for the product lines, handling a variety of tax codes in a different way, and also exemptions. And Drew mentioned, there are countries that you can actually be exempt from tax for certain things. So as we only really launched 2 sites, the France and Canada, refactoring that code was really straightforward, because we hadn't really accrued any technical debt by then, or not much. So once that was done, we then had that kind of refactor approach, and it was a really stable footing for the next territories that we wanted to release, that we could then add those nuances for each of those up and coming territories on. So it was a really good thing to learn early. And again, we hadn't accrued much technical debt. So yeah, it was well spotted and fixed fairly quickly.
So it felt more like a process of learning and evolving something, rather than, oh, that's a big mistake, we need to refactor it and go back and change things and requirements and stuff. Yeah. That feels a lot lighter, easier for everybody. And this is just a slide here just to illustrate. Finally, I think we've already drawn this out throughout this webinar, but the idea that people's experiences are easier and more pleasant on it, which isn't to be underestimated. But yeah, I think you were speaking at one point, Drew, about how easy it was to set clear expectations with the client, because you understood the cadence, because you've done one, so you can more accurately predict how long each one will take in future, so better inform more information for doing that. And the client was able to relax, which is really cool. and it wasn't so monumental that people were scared, and I think that's really important. So in terms of key takeaways, so we've seen how to take a typical project and deliver it in iterations. Your own version of a geographical region might be, if it's higher education, like a school or college, or just it's the process of thinking, okay, what is a good first iteration? It gives us the most learning and the most feedback from reality, from humans, from users, from people actually testing the system, with actually ordering things or making transactions. We've looked at the nature of risk in traditional projects. I hope you think I've been fair in what I've said. Please tell me if you don't. And yeah, I genuinely believe that Agile is lower risk, or the risk is more manageable, and also it's a more empirical process as well than traditional project management. And briefly looked at just how easy it is to learn from each iteration and make fewer errors, or just make more learnings, if that's a word, as you go through and deliver each iteration.